Good evening again, everyone. Uh, I think people are still signing in, but I think we'll start now. I am Sunju Kim, Harvard-Yenching Professor of Korean History and also Director of Korea Institute. Welcome to the second presentation for our new series, Korean Treasures at Harvard. Um, I don't think I need to say this because we are by now very well familiar with Zoom seminar format, but I'd like to remind our audiences today to stay unmuted to minimize any background noise during the presentation. There will be Q&A after the presentation. And if you have any questions to the speaker during the talk, write your name to the host, Brian Park, using chat function. So Harvard Art Museums, as well as Harvard Library, have many interesting and precious items from Korea. For example, Harvard-Yenching Library holds more than 4,000 rare book titles, or almost 13,000 volumes. And some of them are truly unique and rare, being the only copy available in the world. And Harvard Art Museum also holds a significant Korean art collection. I do not know the exact number of objects that we have. Some years ago, there were 600 or more items. You can view images of almost all items through museum's website. If you search the collection by the search term Korea, which I tried this afternoon, it produced more than 1,400 works. I don't know why we have 1,400 works now, but we indeed have a significant number of artworks and significantly important works as well. My understanding is that we have a particularly strong collection of ceramic arts dating from prehistoric period to modern times. We also have pretty good collection of paintings. So this series, Korean Treasures at Harvard, aims at introducing some of these rare and beautiful works to the public and showcasing how we researchers can utilize them for our research and teaching, and what we can learn from these objects. For the second speaker of the series, it is my great pleasure to have my colleague, Professor Shin-Hye Park, Associate Professor of East Asian Languages and Civilizations. Professor Shin-Hye Park studies the literature, literary practices, and linguistic thought of Korea within the larger context of the Sinographic cosmopolis. Professor Park's research specializes in the role of linguistic sensibilities in perception, conceptualization, production, and diffusion of literature, literary historiography, and canon formation. Her first book, titled The Korean Vernacular Story, telling tales of contemporary Joseon in sinographic writing, which explores the rise of the vernacular story genre, Yadam in sinographic writing, has just been published by the Columbia University Press a few months ago. So huge congratulations to Professor Park. She is also the co-editor of Score One for the Dancing Girl and Other Stories from the Kimun Chonghwa, a story collection from 19th century Korea, published by University of Toronto Press, 2016. The most recent article-length study titled The Sound of Learning, the Confucian Classics in Joseon, Korea, appeared in the Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies last year. Professor Park received her PhD from the University of British Columbia in 2012. Ever since her arrival at Harvard in 2014, her innovative scholarship and teaching have made a remarkable contribution to advancing the study of Korean literature at Harvard and beyond. In particular, she has been incorporating our excellent collections at the libraries and museums in her teaching. Last week, I happened to attend one of the webinars offered by the museum and was very pleasantly surprised that the speakers in the study of early modern Europe acknowledged the special course-related exhibit created by Professor Park last year, a wood print block in particular, which became a part of their own comparative teaching materials. So Professor Park's presentation today also involves 3 paintings from the museum, and the title of the talk is 3 Plants and Insects paintings attributed to Saimdang. So now I'd like to invite Professor Park to enlighten us on these pretty paintings.
Thank you very much, Professor Sunju Kim, for your very kind introduction. And good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's so great to see you all, although I cannot see your faces, and I cannot see your videos as well. But I really look forward to our conversation afterward. Thank you so much for making the time to join the second session of the Korea Institute series, Korean Treasures at Harvard. And let me set up here, share screen for my deck of slides here. Let's see, I'm going to just share screen first. Here we go. Does this look okay? Okay, thank you. The Harvard Art Museums, a part of which you can see on the left bottom of this slide, reopened in 2014 after a 6-year-long renovation and expansion. And it holds a total of 147 Korean paintings, which makes up approximately 10% of its 1,455 objects originating from Korea. These are not small numbers. To put things into perspective, there are about 19,000 objects of Korean origin scattered in various museums and institutions in the United States. And the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston holds about 1,000 objects of Korean origin by one count a few years ago. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York holds about 400 objects of Korean origin. Perhaps the numbers have increased in recent years. And today I'm very excited to introduce you to these 3 plants and insects paintings attributed to Shin Saimdang, a 16th century aristocratic woman. And today's presentation really grew out of my own sort of personal curiosity as I looked at various museum objects in preparation for class exhibits and whatnot. And as a researcher and teacher, I specialize in pre-20th century Korean literature and linguistic thought. And while I am no expert in Korean arts and Korean art history, last April, I had the great pleasure to give a brief Zoom presentation organized by my department to discuss these 3 paintings in the context of cool objects at Harvard. So today's presentation is an expansion on that, and it has 3 main parts. I introduced the artist behind these paintings and the significance of her and the genre itself. And I discussed the 3 paintings, and I also point out interesting aspects about the painting's provenance. My aim is to highlight the painting's merit as a nexus for deepening our understanding of Korean history and culture, and for tracing the networks of art objects and people at Harvard for further research and conversation. Shin Saimdang, I will call her Saimdang, was born in Gangneung, Gangwon province in 1504 on the East Coast. She was the second daughter of Shin Myung-hwa and Lady Yi of Yongin. The name Saimdang is her sobriquet, an allusion to Taeim or Tai-Ren in Chinese, the mother of King Won of the Western Zhou dynasty, an ideal society within the Confucian tradition. When Saimdang died in 1551, she had been known as a woman who received education in the classics and the received commentaries, a filial daughter and daughter-in-law, a person skilled in embroidery, and most importantly, a talented painter, particularly known for her landscape paintings and her ink grapes. And here's an example of an ink grapes painting attributed to her, which Harvard does not have. And scholarship thus far has unearthed 17 Joseon women painters, and 5 of them have extant artworks attributed to them. And according to the art historian Sung-Lim Kim, Saimdang is quote unquote synonymous with the grass and insect painting, another name for plants and insect paintings. This statement is certainly true for me personally, and it is hardly an overstatement. And if you do a simple Google image search using the word Saimdang, the first results are her plants and insects paintings, along with her portraits. And the first associated keyword too reads Saimdang 초충도. Of about 80 paintings of varying subject matters and genres attributed to her, more than a half belong to plants and insects paintings. So when I poked around the museum's digital collection, I was startled to encounter the combination of the name Saimdang and plants and insects paintings. And then I got very excited. Could it be that the Harvard Art Museums own the real original works by Saimdang? And some of you might be already familiar with the literature and know that the answer is a resounding no. According to the art historian Lee Sung-mi, none of the surviving works attributed to her or transmitted or received to be hers, for example, as marked by the word 전, can be ascertained as such, although some of the surviving paintings seem indeed close to the style and material during her time. When it comes to Saimdang and her works, particularly plants and insect paintings, however, the question of how she came to be associated with the genre in the first place makes a fascinating story that unfurls how social beliefs about women in the Joseon period shaped Saimdang's oeuvre as a female artist. In today's Korea, Saimdang is a well-known figure. Those of you familiar with Korean currency know that her face appears on the 50,000 won banknote. Some of her artworks, needless to say, all of them are plants and insect paintings, appear on the 50,000 banknote and the 5,000 banknote. And that's her son Yulgok Ii, featured on the 5,000 banknote. And it is also clear that there is a striking resemblance between these two paintings held by the Harvard Art Museums and the designs appearing on the 5,000 banknotes marked with pink boxes here. Here, the pairing of the mother and the son and the mother's looming presence over her son manifested physically on the two banknotes are highly significant. Lee Sung-mi describes Saimdang as quote unquote, a painter who is remembered as a mother. And several art historians have written on the topic of what Berglind Jungman has phrased, quote unquote, the forged image of Shin Saimdang, hence the section title, Saimdang, a mythologized painter. So how does the story go? Shin Saimdang was a noted painter during her lifetime, and several of her works had been transmitted at least within the family and were recorded by 3 literati right after her death, including her son Yulgok. When Yulgok became a renowned scholar and a highly venerated scholar by those who inherited his scholarship and those who sought after forming and consolidating a political lineage with him as a pivotal figure, not only Saimdang, but also her oeuvre as an artist became permanently entwined with her relational role as the mother of the venerable Yulgok. As briefly mentioned, in the 16th century, Saimdang was praised for her landscape painting and ink grapes. Yulgok, for example, wrote this in his biography of my late mother, Harvard-Yenching. My mother's ordinary ink paintings were very exceptional. From the age of 7, emulating Angyun's paintings. Angyun was one of the most celebrated court painters at that time. Her creation of landscape art was particularly beautiful. Moreover, there is no one in the world who could imitate her paintings of grapes. Osukwan, a literatus who created miscellaneous record of various activities of his contemporaries, wrote on Saimdang's paintings, saying her landscape paintings and grapes are comparable to those of Angyun as well. And a literatus named So Se-yang wrote a poem in direct response to Saimdang's extraordinary landscape painting. In the 17th century, Saimdang was idealized, if not idolized, as a virtuous mother befit to have mothered an extraordinary scholar. And the key word here is 부덕, womanly virtue within Confucian rhetoric. The making of Saimdang as an icon of 부덕 accompanied erasing the legacy of Saimdang's landscape paintings and the narrowing of her artistic oeuvre with the suggestion of Saimdang as an excellent painter of plants and insects. The modern day coupling of Saimdang with plants and insects genre owes its genesis to this period of the 17th century. A central figure in this new development was Song Si-yeol, who was among 5 literati who wrote on Saimdang's paintings and himself an architect of the rising Confucian orthodoxy in late Joseon as a society that survived 2 foreign invasions from the Japanese and the Manchus in the late 16th through the early 17th centuries, and the fall of the Ming Dynasty, which really shocked Joseon literati because Joseon state was a state that was formed in the name of Confucian heritage, which they truly believed that the Ming was the only legitimate heir of. Song Si-yeol wrote 2 colophons on Saimdang's paintings, and there he questioned the veracity of Saimdang as a landscape painter, not because lack of evidence to support the view or the availabilities of new materials or interests in her arts. Rather, Song Si-yeol's primary motivation was an ideological one. He equated landscape painting with outer space outside of the bounds of the inner space as an ideologically constructed space suitable for women of propriety, such as Saimdang. Thus, he considered So Se-yang's poem on her painting inappropriate. As an aside, Harvard Art Museum just so happens to hold a portrait of Song Si-yeol. It is somehow unavailable through the museum's digital collection, but a portion of the portrait looks something like this. And according to scholarship, as Song Si-yeol gained in stature as the pillar of Joseon social mores and Confucian orthodoxy in the 17th century onward, several of his portraits appeared, and this is one of them. And the National Library, National Museum of Korea also holds a painting of Song Si-yeol, and there it's a national treasure, number 239. In the 18th century, King Sukjong and over 20 Joseon literati commented on Saimdang or Saimdang's plants and insects paintings. In this period, further Confucian reading of Saimdang's paintings appeared. Maybe this is too much information, so let me say here. Further Confucian reading of Saimdang's paintings occurred as literati linked the genre's orientation toward details to the Confucian principle of the investigation of things, 격물, an intense rumination of the inherent qualities and the principle in all things. For example, a scholar named Kim Jin-gyu suggested that through her painting, Saimdang visualized the plants and insects poem in the Book of Odes, one of the Confucian classics. Also in the 18th century, numerous court painters and literati painted plants and insects paintings, making the contemporary artistic scene full of different kinds of plants and insects paintings, including copies of putatively original Saimdang compositions and outright forgeries of her works. So here is an attempt at visualizing the discursive history of Saimdang and her plants and insect paintings to aid your digestion. I hope this doesn't give you indigestion. In the 18th century, the proliferation of the genre and the increased prominence of Saimdang probably had much to do with the fact that in 1717, King Sukjong wrote on the putatively original transmission of Saimdang's plants and insect paintings that a certain Jeong Pil-dong owned. And the king also commissioned a copy of the set for the palace. Neither the original nor the copy survive, unfortunately. This act of authentication of not only a particular set of paintings as Saimdang's, but also Saimdang as a painter of the genre is an excellent window onto the politics of production, authentication, and circulation of arts in late Joseon. In the 19th century, suggestions of Saimdang as a painter of plum blossoms, which had never been mentioned in any earlier texts, emerged, but did not seem to have gained traction. And beyond Joseon too, Saimdang was an ideal woman for all Korean women to emulate at the turn of the 20th century. During the last stretch of the Japanese colonial period, Saimdang was envisioned as an ideal woman to be looked up to by all women of the greater East Asia to be ruled by the Japanese Empire. Saimdang was a paragon of good wife and good wise mother, 현모 양처, in Japanese, ryusai kenpo, which is where the Korean appropriation emerged from. In post-liberation Korea too, particularly during Park Chung-hee's South Korea as a developmental state, Saimdang was again invoked as an icon of womanly virtue. Here is a statue of Saimdang that Park Chung-hee erected in 1970. Park Chung-hee's wife, Yoo Kyung-soo, was frequently invoked as a modern embodiment of Saimdang as well. In a more recent research on Shin Saimdang and the genre, a great deal of effort has been devoted to rehabilitating Saimdang as a painter in her own right. Here is a bibliography on the topic of Saimdang as the painter of the plants and insects paintings for your reference. And for the rest of the presentations, I will focus more on the paintings held by the museums. So these are the paintings. And in terms of style, the majority of the plants and insects paintings associated with Saimdang are under the influence of the Piling school, which is characterized by a centralized composition of plants and insects hovering around the plants. And we may also decipher these paintings using the visual vocabulary of East Asian symbolisms. Sung-Lim Kim's study has a long section on this. And this kind of East Asian symbolisms would go like this: how certain objects are typically made to suggest particular aspirations and blessings because of their shapes or inequalities or wordplay. For example, insects for patience and successful transformation of oneself, I am told. Vines such as morning glories for the blessing of myriads of generations. And fruits with lots of seeds like watermelons for fertility, and coxcomb for official positions. The three paintings at the Harvard Art Museums have several parallels. The most well-known set of Saimdang's plants and insect paintings are the ones included in a 10-paneled screen, folding screen held by the National Museum of Korea, with 8 panels for paintings and 2 for a colophon written by an 18th century literatist, Shin Kyung. And here is a comparison of the Harvard paintings and the ones at the National Museum of Korea. So this one is held by the National Museum of Korea, and the title is called 전 신사임당 필 조충도. So transmitted as or attributed to 신사임당, to the brushwork of 신사임당. Plants and insects paintings. I'll get to the watermelon painting in the next slide, and here are the comparisons. You can see shared patterns and motifs here, and without a foreknowledge, it's, in my view, it's very easy to mistake and confuse these two paintings. So here is the watermelon painting. And you can see the greater resemblance between the one held by the National Museum of Korea and Harvard Art Museums. And the motif on the 5,000 won banknote on the far right is based upon another 8 painting 10-paneled folding screen held by Ojukon Museum in Gangneung. For example, the one on the banknote does not have the little mice that had been gnawing on the watermelons. As far as I know, no scholarship to date has discussed in detail the 3 paintings at the Harvard Museums, and the fact that the museum have owned these 3 paintings since 1994 has received very little attention. And these are the paintings 10-paneled folding screen held by Ojukon Museum. And you can see the watermelon that appeared on the banknote. And the reputation of Saimdang's skillful embroidery and embroidery as one of the idealized women's work is also entwined with her plants and insect paintings. For example, one folding screen of fine embroidery work based upon the designs associated with Saimdang's works survives and is held by Donghua University. And 3 of them are parallel to the Harvard pieces. And beyond academia, we can trace several different interrelated developments in association with the coupling of Saimdang and the genre, all having to do with some forms of heritage commodification. A tourist brochure made by the city of Gangneung, where Shin Saimdang was born and gave birth to Yulgo, came up with the phrase 세계 최초 무자 화폐 인물, the world's first mother and son duo to appear in a currency. And Gangneung is promoted as worth visiting for its possession of Saimdang-related objects such as the folding screen and Saimdang's calligraphy, putatively attributed to her. Promotion of Saimdang and her art is very much part of the making of a local identity there. And Gangneung actually since 1975 has been awarding a local woman Shin Saimdang Award for having displayed integrity and embodied ideal motherhood and enriched local culture, according to the wording of the award. And Saimdang's plants and insects and paintings are also used as patterns and motifs for modern minhwa, folk paintings. And there are many souvenirs as tourist attractions and national museums based upon these motifs and pattern as Korean things. For example, I have this plate, melamine plate that which is based upon the motif of butterflies and watermelons, based upon the painting that the National Museum of Korea holds. And I bought it there when I visited, last year. Also, the watermelon painting held by the Harvard Art Museums made the cover of the Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies, published earlier this year. So now this is the final part of the presentation. So here I'd like to turn to the metadata of these paintings in the digital collection. Now the metadata revealed that they were acquired in 1994, a fact that also indicated in the call numbers, as you can see, and that they were originally attributed to Lee Am, a famous painter in his own right, particularly known for painting animals. Here is Google image search of Lee Am's works. And my colleague Yan Yang at the Harvard Art Museums tells me that there are 2 in-house curatorial notes on the provenance of the pieces. As for the attribution, shifting from Lee Am to Shin Saimdang, during his visit to Harvard in 1996, Professor An Hui-jun noted that the style of this painting is very close to that of Shin Saimdang. And then later, Professor Lee Sung-mi visited and also mentioned that this painting might be Saimdang. And that's it, the information stops there. What's also interesting about the metadata is that it indicates that Harvard acquired, or the Harvard Art Museums acquired them through Nelson Goodman. Goodman was one of the most influential American philosophers, an expert of language of science, of art, and aesthetics. And he studied at Harvard and taught at Harvard in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And he's a very important figure in Harvard's legacy, presence, and future in art education, as an art educator who founded and led a research group called Project Zero in 1969, which is still going, and which focuses on investigating the nature of learning in and through the arts and how arts relate to fundamental questions of human expression and development. And I have not yet figured out how these paintings ended up here and what Nelson Goodman's role was in bringing these works to Harvard. And according to one news article, he is responsible for 30 paintings that the Harvard Art Museums hold. I do not yet know the nature of this repertoire and how he's connected to his art collecting activities relates to Korean art objects. And here I would like to also mention two names in association with the provenance of the aforementioned Song Si-yeol painting. Its metadata indicates that the Harvard Art Museums purchased it from the estate of Maria C. Henderson, December 2008. Maria Henderson, or Maria Christine Elizabeth von Magnus Henderson, was a sculptor and art collector, and her husband Gregory Henderson was a US bureaucrat who was a Foreign Service officer and a specialist on Korea. The Hendersons probably made the most substantial contribution to the museum's holdings of Korean art objects, for example, the Korean ceramics. The Hendersons lived in Korea from 1958 to 1962, and they assembled most of their collections consisting of their purchases and gifts they received while they were there. The Henderson collection comprises nearly 150 objects that span from the 1st century AD through the 19th century. And Richard D. Maury, an expert of Asian arts and a former head of the Department of Asian Arts at Harvard's Arthur Sackler Museum, curated the Henderson collection. And as far as I know, no scholarship on Song Si-yeol's portraits has discussed the object held by the Harvard Art Museums. So in closing, today's presentation really grew out of my curiosity as I prepared my teaching in connection with women in Chosun society. But as I have demonstrated today, discussing these three paintings enriches our understanding of the arts, intellectual history, and society and culture of Chosun Korea, and our understanding of the intersections of arts, gender, and nation building and empire building in the 20th century East Asia. Furthermore, discussing these paintings unveils networks of objects and individuals that contributed to the legacy and history of the Harvard Art Museums and to the study of Korea at and through Harvard. And it seems evident that these three paintings are invaluable conduits through which we can unfurl the rich history of Korea, Korean arts, and Harvard as an institution as much as they are Korean treasures at Harvard. So thank you very much.